The station called Axis Prime was the biggest thing humanity had ever seen that was not a planet. It floated in the dark between three star systems, built over centuries by hands that were not human, shaped by minds that thought in ways no human school had ever taught. It was wide enough to hold a city inside it. It was old enough that some of its outer halls had never been cleaned, and the dust on them had been sitting there longer than the human species had known how to write. Ambassador Yara Solani had been here 4 times before. She knew the smell of it. She knew the low hum that came from the walls. The way the lighting in the main hall was just a little too green for human eyes, and the way the delegates from other species looked at the human section of the table, the small section, the section near the back, the section with 3 chairs when most species had 10 or 15. She set her bag down, adjusted her coat, and looked at the room. 27 species, each one older than humanity, each one with more ships, more colonies, more history, and each one, in some small or large way, treating the humans like a child who had wandered into a room full of adults and had not yet been told to leave. Yara was used to it. Corporal Desh Okafor was not. He stood 2 steps behind her, young and straight-backed, his uniform clean, his jaw tight. He had graduated from the academy 8 months ago. He had studied diplomacy, alien languages, and interspecies law. He had prepared for this assignment for 2 years. But no class had prepared him for the way the Vrethkai delegate looked at the human seats like they were furniture he was thinking about removing. The Vrethkai were tall. They were built from something between rock and flesh, with wide, flat faces and 4 arms, each one ending in 3 thick fingers. Their empire controlled almost half the Council's military strength. They had been spacefaring for 6,000 years, before humans had figured out the wheel. They knew this, and they made sure everyone else knew it too. The summit started in the morning by station time. There were trade talks, territorial agreements, resource discussions. Yara spoke when it was humanity's turn. She was clear, she was polite, and she made good arguments. She asked for expanded rights over 3 star systems in the outer range of human space systems that were currently unclaimed, uninhabited, and far from anyone else's territory. The Vrethkai delegate, whose name translated roughly into a sound like grinding stone, looked at the human proposal for 4 seconds. Then he said, in the common tongue used at the council, that the ambitions of mayflies were not something the council had time for today. Several delegates laughed. Some of them made sounds that meant laughing in their own languages. Yara did not move. She kept her face still. She had trained herself over 30 years of diplomacy to keep her face still. Desh, behind her, pressed his fingers hard against the back of her chair. The proposal was tabled. That meant it was set aside. That meant it would come back in 6 months or 2 years or never. Yara marked the moment in her notebook with a single small line and moved on to the next item on the agenda. That evening, in the small set of rooms that served as the human quarters on Axis Prime, a woman named Sarah, a quiet intelligence officer who had been on the station for 3 months before the summit even started, knocked on Yara's door. She came inside and sat down and put a data chip on the table without saying anything. Yara picked it up. She read what was on it. She read it twice. The Vrethkai, along with 2 other species, the Sulan Collective, who looked like tall silver insects, and the Doroth Hegemony, who were old and cold and barely spoke at public sessions, had been meeting in private for several months. They had drafted a proposal. The proposal was simple. It said that humanity, given its young age, its limited territory, its small fleet, and it's the word they used translated as something between unstable and excitable, its nature, should be reclassified. Not a member. Not an equal partner with a seat and a vote. A protectorate. A protectorate meant that humanity's colonies would be managed under council oversight. It meant that human fleets would need council approval to move. It meant that human expansion, human decisions about their own space, their own people, their own future, all of it would need to be reviewed and approved by a group of species who had already decided that humans were too small, too young, and too emotional to be trusted. Yara put the chip down. She looked at the wall for a moment. Then she asked Sarah how solid the information was. Sarah said it was solid. She had 3 separate sources. Yara said she needed to request an emergency closed session with the council's executive panel. She would file the request tonight. The request was filed. The response came back within the hour. The request was denied. The council's executive panel did not have space in the current schedule for an unplanned session at the request of a junior member delegation. Junior member. Desh read the response over Yara's shoulder. He said nothing, but his hands were still. Later that night, when the others had gone to sleep, Yara stood alone at the observation window at the end of the human quarters corridor. The window was long and narrow, and through it, she could see the stars. Not the soft, familiar stars of the Sol system, but foreign stars, older light, coming from places she had never been and might never go. Desh found her there an hour before station lights out. He had not been able to sleep. He stood beside her and looked at the same stars, and after a while he asked her if she was afraid. She thought about it honestly. Then she said no. He asked what she was doing then, just standing there in the dark. She said she was remembering. He waited for her to explain. She did not explain, but her eyes were steady, and her hands were loose at her sides, and she did not look like a woman who was afraid of anything in that room, or on that station, or in all of the space outside the window. He went back to his bunk. She stayed at the window a little longer. Outside, Axis Prime turned slowly in the dark, ancient and enormous, and completely unaware that it was standing at the edge of something it had never been close to before. The hallway on Deck 9 was not an important hallway. It did not lead to any of the summit chambers or the main meeting floors. It connected the lower technical section of the station to the supply lifts, and most of the people who used it were maintenance workers and station technicians. Small people doing quiet jobs, carrying tools and parts from one place to another. Petra Voss was one of those people. She was 34 years old. She was not a soldier or a diplomat. She was a systems technician assigned to the human delegation's support team, which meant she spent her days making sure the communication equipment worked and the environmental filters in the human quarters were properly calibrated. She had been to Axis Prime twice before, and she liked the work. She was good at it. She was walking down Deck 9 that morning with a toolkit in one hand and a parts list in the other, thinking about a filter problem in room 7, when a Vrethkai official came around the corner ahead of her. He was not alone. There were 2 others behind him, junior staff by the look of them, young and broad and carrying nothing, walking with the loose, easy confidence of people who had never been told to move out of the way in their lives. Petra moved to the side of the hallway. She gave them plenty of room. This was normal. This was just how it worked on Axis Prime. You moved. You made space. The Vrethkai official looked at her as he passed. Then he put out one of his arms and shoved her. It was not an accident. It was not a stumble. He looked at her first. Then he shoved her, hard and flat, into the wall of the corridor. She hit the bulkhead with her shoulder first, and then her head. And the toolkit flew out of her hand, and the parts list crumpled under her as she dropped to one knee. The 3 Vrethkai kept walking. One of the ones behind the official made a sound. It might have been a comment. It might have been a laugh. They did not stop. Petra stayed on one knee for a moment. Her shoulder was burning. She reached up and touched the side of her head where it had hit the wall. Her fingers came back clean, no blood. But the pain was already spreading down her arm, and she could feel that something was not right. She tried to lift the arm and stopped. It hurt too much to lift it. She did not cry. She sat there on the floor of Deck 9 and took 2 long breaths, and then she heard footsteps behind her. Corporal Desh Okafor had been coming from the other direction. He had seen all of it. He helped her up with one arm, careful of her injured shoulder, and he looked down the corridor at the backs of the 3 Vrethkai officials, who had not turned around. He asked Petra if she was all right. She said she was fine. He could tell she was not fine. He told her to wait there. Then he walked after the Vrethkai official. Not running, walking, fast, and quiet, and straight. He caught up to them 10 meters down the hall, and stepped in front of the official, and told him, in the common tongue, that he had injured a civilian member of the human delegation, and that he needed to stop and answer for it. The Vrethkai official looked at Desh the way that someone looks at a thing they are deciding whether to step on or step over. Then he stepped forward and pushed Desh in the chest. Desh did not fall. He was a soldier. He planted his feet, and he stayed standing, and he said again, very clearly, that this needed to stop right now. The Vrethkai official said something. His voice was loud, and the common tongue carried clearly in the corridor. He said that junior species should keep their mouths closed in the presence of their betters. Desh said one more thing. He said that the word betters was not a word that applied here. The Vrethkai official hit him. It was not a shove. It was a strike. A heavy, open-handed blow across the side of Desh's face that spun him sideways and put him into the corridor wall. The other two Vrethkai stepped closer. Vrethkai station security arrived less than 2 minutes later. They came from the end of the hallway, 4 of them, heavy and fast. They looked at the scene, a human soldier leaning against the wall with blood on his lip, a human civilian sitting on the floor with an arm she could not lift, and 3 Vrethkai officials standing in the middle of the corridor, and they made their decision in about 2 seconds. They detained Desh and Petra. The 3 Vrethkai officials were escorted away. Not detained. Escorted, politely, in the other direction. Desh asked why. The security officer explained, in flat and practiced language, that GCC regulations allowed the hosting species to temporarily hold any individuals involved in a corridor incident until a formal review was completed. Desh asked how long that would take. The security officer said 6 standard weeks. The holding cell was a small room near the security station on Deck 9. The walls were smooth, and the light was steady, and there was nothing in it but 2 flat surfaces to sit on. Through the transparent front wall, Desh could see the corridor. He could see station staff walking by. He asked twice for a medical officer for Petra's shoulder. The first request was acknowledged. The second request was acknowledged. Nobody came. Petra sat on the bench with her right arm held tight against her body, her face pale, not complaining. 2 hours passed. Vrethkai security staff walked by the cell several times. At least 2 of them looked in and said something to each other that Desh could not hear. They did not look concerned. Then, in the 3rd hour, one guard stopped at the cell. He had a baton at his side. He looked at Desh for a long moment. Then he opened the access panel on the side of the cell door, not to open it, just to reach the small vent grill near the floor, and as he straightened back up, he brought the baton across in a single fast motion and struck Desh across the upper arm and shoulder through the open vent gap. Then he did it again. Desh's shoulder buckled, and he hit the back wall. He did not cry out. He hit the wall, and he slid down it slowly, and he sat on the floor, breathing through his teeth. The guard closed the panel. He walked away. In the corridor, at the edge of the camera angle, a human staff member, a young communications assistant named Leo, lowered his personal device and pressed himself flat against the far wall, heart going very fast. He had been walking to the supply lift when he heard the sound. He had stopped. He had recorded all of it. He was not the only one. 2 other humans had seen the same thing from different angles. All 3 of them had recorded it. The footage was on the internal network within 20 minutes. It was suppressed by station security within 23 minutes. But 23 minutes was long enough. Ambassador Yara Solen received the message in the middle of a session recess. She read it standing in the hallway outside the main chamber, her tablet in one hand, the noise of the summit behind her. She read it once. She stood very still. She closed her eyes. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. Then she opened them. She turned to her senior aide, a woman named Cass, who had worked with her for 11 years, and she said 2 things very quietly. The first was, "Get me a secure channel to Earth, encrypted, flagged urgent." The second was, "Wake up, the Admiral." Then she walked back toward the chamber with the same straight back, and the same steady face she always had, and no one watching her would have known that anything had changed. But something had changed. On Luna, in the gray underground complex of Seoul Defense Command, an admiral whose name most people in the galaxy did not know, sat at a long desk and read the incoming message on a plain screen. He read it once. He set it down on the desk. He did not look alarmed. He did not look surprised. He looked the way a man looks when something he has been quietly dreading for a long time finally arrives. And the dread becomes a kind of tired clarity. He picked up the command channel. He said, "Begin protocol remembrance." Then he leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling and breathed out slowly, like a man setting down something very heavy that he had been carrying for a long, long time. The council chamber was full when Ambassador Yara Solene walked in the next morning. Every seat was taken. Every delegation was present. There was noise, the low overlapping sound of 24 species talking at the same time in different languages, all of it feeding through translation systems that turned the room into a constant murmur. The summit agenda for the day was listed on the shared display: Territorial Boundary Review, Second Session, Resource Allocation for Outer Rim Systems, a vote on updated communication protocols. Yara sat down at the human section. She placed her bag on the floor. She folded her hands on the table. The session chair, a tall, gray-skinned Dorith official with slow, careful movements, called the room to order. Yara stood up. The chair told her that open statements were not scheduled until the second half of the session. Yara said she was not making an open statement. She was submitting a document. She walked to the central data terminal, which sat in the middle of the chamber floor on a raised platform, and she inserted a chip. The document appeared on every screen in the room simultaneously. It was not a grievance. It was not a protest letter. It was not a formal complaint about the incident on Deck 9, which had been filed by the Vrethkai as an internal station matter and assigned a case number and placed in a queue. It was a declaration of withdrawal and sovereign reclassification. The document cited Article 77 of the Convergence Compact, a clause that very few council delegates had read carefully because it had never been used. The clause said that any member species could withdraw from the GCC if they could demonstrate that their people had been placed in systematic danger by the council or its members. The document was precise and clean, and it listed 3 things: the Deck 9 incident, the suppressed footage, and the private negotiations to reclassify humanity as a protectorate without a vote or notification. The room went loud immediately. The Vrethkai representative stood up. He was not a small figure. He filled the space around his section of the table, and his voice, even through the translator, was large. He called the document a performance. He called it an emotional response from a species too young to understand how the council worked. He said that humanity would not leave because humanity had nowhere to go, and that the protectorate proposal was a gesture of care, not an insult, and that children did not get to sit at adult tables and decide the rules. Several other delegates made sounds, some of agreement, some of discomfort. Many said nothing. Then the screens across the chamber changed. Not all of them. 3 of them, in different sections of the room. They flickered, and then the footage started playing. Clear, steady footage from 3 separate angles, shot on personal devices in a corridor on Deck 9. No audio editing. No cuts. A guard, a baton, a human soldier, and a wall. The footage ran for 40 seconds. Then it stopped. And then every open communication channel connected to Axis Prime received the same footage. Every independent news relay in the connected network of 19 systems received it. Every diplomatic observer channel, every press network, every private feed that had a connection to the station received it in the same moment. 3 humans had recorded it. 3 humans had agreed, quietly, in a small room the night before, to send it everywhere at the same time. The chamber was very loud for a while. Then it became a different kind of loud, the kind where everyone is speaking but no one knows what to say, where the noise is covering up the fact that something important has just broken, and no one has figured out how to explain it yet. Yara sat back down. She did not say anything else. She watched the room the way you watch water after you have dropped something into it, tracking the rings moving outward. On the other side of the galaxy, the rings were moving fast. In the Sol system, in the quiet dark of space between Earth and Mars, ships were moving. Not fast, not loudly. There were no dramatic launches, no alarm signals, no visible military formations. The ships moved the way that people move when they have been waiting calmly for a bus that they always knew was coming, steady and prepared and without any wasted motion. These were not the ships that humanity had disclosed to the Council. The disclosed fleet was real. It had real numbers and real ships, all of them properly registered and accurately reported. Those ships were what they were. But humanity had been building other ships too. They had been building them for 30 years. Not secretly, exactly. The documents existed. The numbers were real. They had been submitted to the Council's standard member disclosure files when humanity had first joined the GCC, filed correctly, with accurate figures, in a long technical appendix that the Council's intake committee had reviewed and summarized and filed away. The summary had been shorter than the original document, as summaries usually are. The original document, if anyone had read it fully, would have been interesting. It described weapons research programs. It described a class of ships designed not for exploration or commerce, but specifically for defense of sovereign territory. It described a grid system built into every human colony infrastructure that looked like civilian power distribution on the surface, but was something else underneath. It described a level of readiness that the Council had never associated with a species that had only been in space for 150 years. The Council had looked at humanity and seen a young species. Short-lived. Emotional. Small. They had not looked closely enough. At Kepler Station, the largest human colony in the outer systems, Commander Adaize Nwosu received a single short message on a channel that had been silent for 11 years. The message had 3 words. She read them and set the message down on her desk, and then she pressed a button on her console. Deep under the civilian levels of Kepler Station, in sections that were not on the public layout maps but were absolutely on the original construction permits, lights came on. Systems powered up, charge built in long silent coils of technology that had been sitting ready and still for a decade. People who had civilian-facing roles, engineers, administrators, technicians, went to secondary stations and became something else for the duration of whatever was coming. They did not panic. They had trained for this. They had trained for this so many times, for so many years, that what they felt was not fear but focus, the particular focused calm of people who know exactly what to do and are now being asked to do it. Back on Axis Prime, in the chamber, the Vrethkai representative had stopped speaking. He was reading something on his private screen. His expression, which was always difficult for humans to read, had shifted into something that Desh, watching from a corridor monitor outside with his shoulder wrapped and his face bruised, thought looked like the beginning of a new kind of calculation. Other delegates were also reading their screens. Private messages from their home systems, news from their networks, reports from observers who had received the footage. 3 delegations were not reading their screens. They were watching Yara, the Yalu Ascendancy representative, the Marindrift delegate, the old Chelk counselor. All 3 of them were watching her with careful eyes, and they were not making any sounds at all. In the chamber, one voice cut through the noise. It was not loud. It was old and slow, and it belonged to the Orowan elder, who sat in a curved seat at the far end of the chamber and rarely spoke. His species was older than the GCC itself. When he spoke, the room got quiet by habit. He did not say much. He looked at the Vrethkai representative and he said, "We should read the documents they gave us when they arrived." Nobody laughed. But nobody looked comfortable either. Outside in the corridor, Desh pressed his forehead to the cool wall and breathed slowly. His shoulder hurt. His face hurt. But somewhere inside his chest, something that had been wound tight for the past 20 hours was beginning just barely, just at the edges to loosen. The Council voted on the 14th day after the declaration. By that point, the footage had been seen by more living beings than any single piece of information in the history of the GCC. It had been discussed in private sessions, in public forums, in news broadcasts across 19 systems. Some species had called it a crisis. Some had called it an exaggeration. The Vrethkai had called it a misunderstanding, caught out of context, and their official statement had been so carefully worded that it managed to say almost nothing at all in a very large number of sentences. The vote was about invoking emergency military jurisdiction over human space. This was an old mechanism in the compact, designed for situations where a member species was considered unstable or dangerous, where the Council decided it needed to step in and take control for the good of everyone. It had never been used before on a functioning member species. The Vrethkai pushed for it. The Sulan Collective supported it. The Doroth Hegemony supported it. The vote was 14 in favor, 9 against, 4 abstentions. It passed. The 3 delegates who had been watching Yara, the Yalu, the Marin, the Chelk, all voted against. They voted against clearly and without hesitation, and then they sat in their seats and watched the room with expressions that said they knew exactly what they had just voted against, and they were not surprised by the outcome. But they had needed to be on the right side of it when the record was written. Yara received the result in the human quarters. She read it. She nodded once. Then she told Cass to confirm that all human installations in GCC-controlled territory had received the evacuation signal. Cass confirmed it. All of them had received it. 14 installations. 4,300 people. Moving already, quietly, in ships that had been preloaded and pre-fueled for exactly this, heading towards sovereign human space at standard cruise speed, drawing no attention. Not running. Moving. There is a difference. Running looks like fear. Moving looks like intention. The Vrethkai assembled their fleet, 11 days later. It was not their full military strength. Full military strength would have been too obvious, too aggressive even for the Council's current mood. This was a demonstration fleet, 22 ships, including 4 heavy cruisers, a carrier, and a long column of escort vessels. Enough to make a point. Enough to show up at a colony and make it clear that the 14 votes were not just numbers on a screen. They chose Kepler Station. It was the most visible human colony in the outer systems, the largest, the most established. Taking jurisdiction, there would be a statement. It would show the rest of the Council that the vote had teeth. It would show humanity that withdrawal declarations and emotional footage and quiet ship movements did not change the basic reality of who had the larger fleet and who had the older empire and who sat at the head of the table. The Vrethkai fleet dropped out of transit speed at the edge of the Kepler system at midday, station time. Commander Adaize Nwosu was already at her post. She was a small woman in her late 40s, with close-cut gray hair and very calm hands. She had commanded Kepler Station for 6 years. She had raised 2 children here. She had seen supply shortages and equipment failures, and a transit collision that had killed 8 of her people. And she had handled all of it with the same steady, practical focus. She was not a person who wasted energy on anything that was not directly in front of her and directly useful. Right now, directly in front of her, there was a Vrethkai fleet. The fleet commander hailed Kepler Station on the standard Council emergency channel. His message was short. He said that under the authority of the Galactic Convergence Council's emergency jurisdiction resolution, he was requesting Kepler Station to acknowledge Council authority, stand down any non-civilian ship operations, and prepare for a Council representative to board within the next 4 hours. Commander Nwosu listened to the full message. Then she responded. She said that Kepler Station was operating under Article 77 withdrawal status and was classified as sovereign human territory, as submitted and confirmed through the proper compact channels 3 days prior. She said that any action taken against this station would constitute an act of aggression against a sovereign political entity and would be responded to accordingly. She said this clearly and without any heat in her voice. She said it the way someone reads out the rules of a game they have played many times before. The Vrethkai fleet commander paused. Then he made a sound that the translation system rendered as something between amusement and dismissal. He said that Article 77 withdrawal was a legal argument, and that legal arguments did not change the physics of the situation. He asked her to look at the number of ships currently in her system. She said she had looked. He ordered a warning shot. A single rail charge from one of the escort vessels, aimed at an automated drone relay platform 2,000 kilometers from the station. It hit. The relay was destroyed. Nobody was on it. Nobody was hurt. He said that was what it looks like when we are being polite. Commander Nwosu said, "Understood." She pressed 2 keys on her console. The kinetic phase lance system had been built into Kepler Station's infrastructure over the course of 8 years. It looked, from the outside, like nothing at all. Power routing infrastructure. Grid management hardware. The kind of deep technical equipment that was present in any large installation, and that nobody ever looked at closely because it was boring and functional and everywhere. It was not boring. 3 targeting solutions had been calculated and confirmed before the fleet had finished its approach. The system fired twice in a window of 14 seconds. Two escort vessels and one of the heavy cruiser's forward engine sections came apart cleanly. No fire, there is no fire in vacuum. Just pieces, expanding outward in the geometry of things that are no longer whole. Then it stopped. Nuwasu had not targeted the carrier. She had not targeted the fleet flagship. She had not targeted anything that would kill the most people, or make the biggest visible explosion. She had targeted 3 specific ships, in specific positions, and the targeting had been exact, and then she had stopped. The channel was open. She could hear the fleet. Nobody spoke for a long time. She waited. 14 seconds had passed. 3 ships were gone. 19 ships remained, and none of them were moving, and all of them were still fully capable, and none of them had fired again. The silence on the channel went on and on. Then she said, on the same channel, to the fleet commander directly, "We are still listening." No further orders came from the fleet for the rest of the day. In the council chamber on Axis Prime, the news arrived in the middle of a procedural session on resource allocation. A junior aide brought it to the Vrethkai representative on a private screen. He read it. He read it again. Then he sat very still, which was unusual. He was not usually a man who sat still. Other delegates received the news within minutes. The room shifted. It did not become loud. It became the opposite of loud. A careful, attentive silence, where everyone was processing the same information, and nobody was sure yet what to say out loud. One delegate from a small coastal species near the outer edge of council territory leaned over to their aide and whispered something. The aide whispered back. The delegate picked up their tablet and began reading. They were reading the original human disclosure documents, submitted 80 years ago, the full version, not the summary. The Vrethkai representative eventually stood up. He said that the council needed to respond immediately and with full force. The Orun elder said, "To what end?" The room was quiet again. The Yelu delegate looked at the Vrethkai representative and then looked away. The Marin delegate put her tablet down. The Chelk counselor said nothing. All 3 of them had already sent quiet messages to Yara's personal channel, asking for a private meeting at her earliest convenience. Outside the chamber, Desh sat in the human quarters common room, with his arm in a proper sling. Petra had finally gotten a medic, and Desh had finally let someone look at his shoulder too, and they were both doing better physically, though neither of them had slept much in days. He was watching the news relay on a small screen in the corner. The footage from Kepler was coming through in fragments, not full video, just data and coordinates and the shapes of what had happened. He watched it for a long time without saying anything. Petra was across the room. She had her good arm across her chest, her injured arm still held close. She asked him what he thought. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think somebody finally read the footnotes. The Vrethkai fleet at Kepler did not advance. They sat in formation at the edge of the system for 9 days. Supply ships came and went. The fleet commander sent 2 more messages to Commander Nuwasu. She acknowledged both of them. She offered no concessions. She made no threats. She simply continued operating Kepler Station the same way she had operated it every day for the last 6 years. Supplies moving, people working, systems running, with the quiet added fact that 19 enemy warships were parked 2 million kilometers away and had not moved. On the 9th day, the fleet pulled back. There was no announcement. No statement. They just turned and left, and the space where they had been was empty again. And Nuwasu noted it in the daily log, the same way she noted everything, in clear, plain language, with the date and time. 3 weeks after that, the inquiry opened. The Council's own arbitration body had been pressed into it by 9 different member species who had submitted formal requests for review. Even some of the species that had voted in favor of the jurisdiction motion had submitted requests. The footage from Deck 9 had been watched by too many people for too long. The numbers 3, destroyed escort vessels, no response from a 19-ship fleet. A colonial station that had fired twice and stopped had been discussed in too many private channels. The arithmetic was uncomfortable. The arithmetic said something that the Council had not officially acknowledged yet, but that everyone in every chamber and every delegation suite was thinking. The inquiry opened formally, and the first witness was Corporal Desh Okafor. He sat at the witness table in a room that had representatives from 11 species, and he answered questions for 3 hours. He was precise. He was not angry when he spoke. He was not trying to make anyone feel bad. He described what had happened on Deck 9 in the same order it had happened, using the same plain language he would have used to write a report for his commanding officer. He said what he saw, what he heard, what was done to him, and what was done to Petra, and how long it had taken for a medic to arrive. Near the end of the session, one of the delegates from a species called the Barath, a quiet people, who had said very little publicly throughout the entire crisis, asked Desh one question that was not about facts. She asked how he had felt. Desh looked at her for a moment. Then he said, he felt the way any human feels when someone decides that they don't matter. Like something old and familiar. Like something humans had lived with for a long time, on their own world, before they ever left it. He said humans had a long history of being told they were too small or too young or too loud or too much, and being pushed to the side, and being expected to stay there. He said humans had never been good at staying there. He said, we always get back up. The room was quiet when he finished. The Vrethkai guard, who had struck him in the cell, was formally prosecuted 2 weeks after the inquiry opened. The Vrethkai High Council released a statement, saying that the guard had acted outside his authority, and that his actions did not reflect the values of the Vrethkai people. The statement was very carefully written. It said everything that needed to be said for the record and nothing more. Whether the Vrethkai believed it or not was harder to know. But the prosecution happened, and the record showed it happened, and that was what the rest of the council needed to see. Yara watched all of it from a distance. She was not in the chamber much in those weeks. She was in smaller rooms, in private meetings, in quiet conversations that were not on any official agenda. The 3 delegates who had voted against the jurisdiction motion, the Yelu, the Marin, and the Chelk, had all come to her individually first, and then together. They were different from each other in almost every way. Different biologies, different languages, different histories, different territories. But they had one thing in common. They had been watching humanity for a long time, longer than most, and what they had seen had not matched what the council said was there. They talked. For many hours, over many days, they talked. What came out of those conversations was not grand. It did not have a ceremony or a large audience. It was a document, 8 pages long, plain and careful, which outlined the terms of a new agreement between 4 sovereign entities, humanity, and its 3 partners. The document was called the Solene Accord. It said several things that were simple, and several things that were not. The simple things. Every member was a full member, no protectorates, no lesser categories, no managed species, no approval required for internal decisions. The not simple thing. The accord was open to others, but the cost of entry was genuine equality. You could not join and then vote to make someone else smaller. You could not sit at this table and decide the table had a head. Word got out. Word always gets out. Within a month, 7 other species had sent quiet messages to Yara's office. Some of them were small species who had been in the GCC for decades and had never had more than 2 seats at the table. Some of them were mid-sized powers who had voted with the Vrethkai on the jurisdiction motion and now needed to decide whether they had done that because they believed it or because it had seemed safe at the time. Yara read every message. She responded to each one personally. She did not rush. The GCC did not fall apart. It continued. It still had 23 member species after the Chelk, Yelu, and Marin formally suspended their participation to join the accord. It still had its chambers and its sessions and its long, complicated procedures, but something in it had changed that could not be changed back. The way a door that has been opened cannot pretend it was never open. The authority the council had always assumed, it had the kind that came not from agreement, but from the assumption that no one would ever question it. That kind of authority does not survive being wrong in front of 19 systems at once. The Vrethkai High Council debated the Solene Accord for 6 weeks. It was the loudest internal debate they had ever had, by most accounts. There were factions who said the accord was a trap, a human attempt to build a rival structure around them. There were factions who said refusing the accord was a guarantee of long-term isolation. There were old voices who said that no species with their history